Diane Boden, welcome to About Progress.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Monica. I'm excited to chat with you.
I've been wanting you on the show forever, and it's to talk about something that I have personally felt really drawn to. I think, especially maybe 5-ish years ago, I feel like minimalism was all the rage. Like everyone was talking about it. There were documentaries, several full podcasts just devoted to minimalism and this movement. And you were a part of that movement in your own way as a minimalist mom. And that's your podcast. You've written a book, like all these good things. And it doesn't seem like it's going anywhere. But my goal for this conversation today is to help women find what minimalist principles will help them in their everyday life. So maybe they don't have to be a black and white minimalist, but there are things we can learn from this. So let's start with how you found this movement, why you were drawn to it, and how it's changed your life.
Yes, absolutely. I do want to say first and foremost that minimalism is a tool. I think, like you said, it doesn't have to be so black and white. Although my walls in our new home are pretty bare and sparse, not necessarily my intention long term. And I also have 3 children. So I don't have just empty rooms all throughout my home. Like we absolutely have the thing. So I don't want people to hear here at the beginning the word minimalism and just automatically tune out because it really is just a tool of intentionality for how we can live with less, but have an
Mm.
abundance of freedom and joy and peace and time. Like there's so much I've gained with becoming a quote unquote minimalist, really just living intentionally. So I just want to set the conversation up in that way. But I discovered minimalism back in, I don't know, maybe let's see here. My husband and I have been married for 13 years. So we'll say for about 10 years, I have been practicing this life of less. And my husband and I were in my parents' basement looking for something. And he turned to me and said, look at all these things that are now in boxes that were once your dad's hard earned working hours. And for some reason, that was just a light bulb moment for me of what have I been working towards? What have I been working for? I felt like I had been working for all the tangible things, the new clothing, always the latest iPhone, anything that I wanted, really, all the new and shiny things, especially prior to getting married. My husband kind of like started helping me budget a lot more when we got married. But I really didn't have anything to show for it. I was left dissatisfied. And again, we didn't really have a conversation in that moment. It was just an aha moment of, I want to start being more intentional about the fact that time is money, money is time, and that I don't want a basement one day filled to the brim of things that I no longer use. And I always want to not throw my parents completely under the bus because obviously we had a vibrant, rich childhood. Yes, full of things. But also, I think there's something to be said about holding on to those things after they've overstayed their welcome. And so that was something to start digging deeper into as I evolved as a minimalist. But yeah, I would say it was just that moment that got me thinking about intentionality. And then flash forward a handful of years later, you're right, the minimalist, if those two guys became a thing. And
Yeah.
a girlfriend and I from a MOPS group, which is mothers of preschoolers, I saw that she had wanted to start a podcast. I did too. We're like, what do we have in common? She was living in a ginormous house at the time. I was living in 800 square feet, but we both had this common theme of living with intention and with less. So we're like, oh, this could be like a great conversation to have on a podcast. Let's see what happens. She ended up stepping away. I kind of took it over and made it more interview based. And I think the content speaks for itself. And it's not necessarily me. It's just I'm talking to all of these various people from all different walks of life, but they all have this common thread of I want to live with intention and fill in the blank area. So that was my journey into it. Sorry, it was a little long winded, but I wanted to give you the full background.
No, I love the background. I love learning from people's stories. I think especially that's how I can relate to something that maybe I previously didn't think I could relate to,
Mm.
especially when I think of maybe what a stereotypical vision of a minimalist would look like. And then I think, oh no, wait, no, I want that too. I want to live more intentionally. I want to have what actually matters in my home. And
Mm.
I do want to hear more about the process of what that kind of looked like tangibly in your life. How did it change the way you lived?
Mhm.
How did it change what you brought into your home? And now I know this has been several years, so there's probably been several phases and iterations of this, but what does that look like for you?
Yeah. So I think in certain ways we were more frugal than minimalist at the very beginning just because we got married so young and I was still in college. I wasn't exactly sure what was going to happen. And then we had our daughter. And so frugality isn't minimalism. I've learned that because there are a lot of people that are frugal, but they tend to hold on to their things. So, yes, it started out with frugality of just being more disciplined about what we were spending. But again, with clothing, I was really into clothing. So that was somewhat where I started of just saying, do I even wear all of these things that I own and why am I owning them? And over the years, assessing where my value comes from, because I think my identity and my value was in my appearance and the things that I was wearing. And when I really dug deeper into that, I was able to let go a little bit easier. And I think the same thing has gone for my
Yeah.
things of saying, look, my husband and I are on a certain type of budget, and my hospitality or my value doesn't come from what we have in our home to offer you. It comes from us and the relationship that we are hopefully mutually offering one another. And so I would say in certain ways, it didn't have to do with the things, it's kind of the deeper work of the motivation
Yeah.
to keeping the things, which is kind of cool. But yeah, I think that things just kind of followed as I started doing some of this mental work.
Well, that's what I love to hear because that makes more sense to me. And it also gives us the ability to do it based off of our values. So that
Mhm.
means what we choose to keep is more in alignment with what we cherish and what we value, and let it be the same way for other people, even if that looks different. So let's talk about women who may think that living like a minimalist would be unrealistic, but there's still like a I'm talking about stereotypical kind, and I
Sure.
love that. The way you talked about that is so different, the intentional version of it. So let's say they're drawn to that version.
Mhm.
Oh, I want to live a life with more intention. So let's go principles then. What are some minimalist principles that you think all moms can adopt?
So some of the principles that I live by when it comes to minimalism, like I said, it is a tool, but there are some little like basic mantras that I try and live by when it comes to minimalism. One is quality over quantity. I always have had kind of bougie taste, and I realized, okay, you can't like spend all the money that you want and have all these clothes and again, nothing to show for it in your bank account because I'd rather put my intention towards experiences, which people over things, experiences over things is another thing. But that whole quality over quantity, I'd rather have a nice sweater that lasts me many, many, many years versus going to Target and having to replace that sweater that pills after 1 year and just doesn't look as nice. I'd rather invest up front. And I know that's always hard for people because they're like, well, this cost just seems high for right now. And I don't necessarily have that in the budget. I don't really either. I love Poshmark. I love Facebook Marketplace. I love going
Yeah,
to secondhand shops. Most of my clothing at
thanks
this
for
point,
highlighting that.
yeah, most of my clothing at this point is secondhand. And I actually thrive on finding exciting deals. I love to be able to say, like,
Yeah,
this was secondhand and I love this outfit. So the quality over quantity is one that I try and live by. I love living by kind of one in, one out. So if I do get something new, just saying something else has to go. So I only have a certain amount of hangers. Once they're filled, it's like, okay, we're not going to buy any more hangers. It's time to assess and get rid of something. Some people might think this is overthought or rigid, but it just kind of helps me stay in line and stay with my values because I've seen the benefit again in the freedom of doing that. And I will say, if you have a certain amount of hangers in your closet, I pretty much always love what I'm wearing because I've whittled my wardrobe down to the things
yeah.
that look good on me. And if something doesn't, even every time that I'm doing laundry, I'm going through and just kind of assessing, okay, have my kids grown out of this? Has this like overstayed its welcome? Do I still wear this? And I have a box in my laundry space that it just goes into that donation bin. So I can easily just have it removed. So again, these little things that we're just putting in our day to day that we might not be like those minimalist guys, or we might not be like Marie Kondo for people that are familiar, but we are just trying to
Mhm.
be intentional with the things that we're bringing in. The other thing, I don't know if this is a principle, but it's just something I like to think about that acquisition cycle. So stopping the clutter before it comes in the door. And we have to be
Mm.
intentional about that. Walking by that dollar spot at Target or making all of our Target purchases or the majority of them order ahead pickup purchases as opposed to walking through. And I mean, we don't have to open the can of worms of marketers and how they want to suck you into every new thing every time you walk through a Target. But you're never going to be able to purchase everything that is so shiny to you in that store. So once you start kind of switching your perspective of what their game is, it kind of helps you to be more strategic and say, I don't want to be a pawn in this bigger game. Like, I have enough. I'm content. I'm going to like focus on gratitude for the things that I do have. If I want something, I can think about it long term. Sorry, now I'm going to like all the processes, but these are just kind of the ways that I
Love
think
this.
now. I just think this way. And again, this doesn't necessarily happen overnight. This is me putting in some effort and some thought into it. But just these little mantras, which is what I wrote about in my book. They're all just little mantras to like think about throughout the day. I mean, don't even buy the book, get it from the library. But yeah, one last one that's really helpful is the 1 second rule. So at the end of my day, I just told you it's been a really long day. It's 9 o'clock here in Ohio and I'm going to go to bed after this. But I have been picking up throughout my day by the 1 minute rule. So if I have something that I can do within a minute or so, I just take care of it right then and there. So that doesn't build for the end of my day. Because right now I'm too tired, but I don't also want to go down to a sink full of dishes in the morning. But it's like, I don't have to do that because I've kept up with it all day. I've hung up the clothes back in the closet. I've hung up the jackets. I've put the shoes away. Just kind of those little tidying things and again, don't beat yourself up if you can't do all of this at once. It's just slowly building and gaining that momentum.
I especially love that last bit there because I think when we're drawn to something like this, we then get overwhelmed by the sheer number of things we have to go through to get to that place where we feel like what we have is in alignment with who we are and how we want to live our lives. So let's now talk to the people who are in that place a bit and they want to follow through more, they want to use these principles, but they are also kind of feeling stuck with the tangible side of it. Like how do I actually do this then? If I do have like an entire space, even if it's just a big room to go through, how do I do this?
The best tip that I have here, and I think anyone that is practicing in this realm would tell you the same thing, is that you need to pull everything out and assess what you have. But I always do say start in the bathroom because it's the
Mm,
least sentimental place in your entire home, typically. And so it's
yeah.
easier to kind of go through there and navigate what you have, pulling everything out and even setting a time limit on it and saying for 30 days, I'm going to live without things on my countertop in the bathroom or even artwork on the wall in my bathroom. I'm going to keep it simple and functional. And then I'll slowly add back in the things that I need and want and enjoy. Like, I don't think minimalism
Yeah.
also is just this bare thing that we don't enjoy the homes that we're creating or the life that we're living. I am really into art and I actually have a huge intention of having tons of art over one wall downstairs. That doesn't seem very minimalist. It's actually probably the opposite. But art brings me joy, so that's why I'm going to do that. That's a total
Mm,
side note. So when you are going into those
I love
spaces,
that.
I think so when you are going into spaces, pull everything out and assess what you have. I think you'll know right away the things that you're using regularly. And then maybe have a box for what's in limbo, what's like, maybe I'm going to use it, but maybe not. And then you have the trash and the things you know you're never going to use or don't use. And I think a lot of this too, as I've said, I've had to put in some work mentally to say, and to get to know myself, to say what is rational, what is true, what have my habits been? Not living for my future self, not living for my past self, living for myself. Because oftentimes we get into habits that are much harder to change. And I don't want to be living for that future self. I want to live for who I am now. I can have goals, and I think that's
Yeah.
important. You talk about that on your show, like how to change in these processes. But I best want to set myself up for success now to like give myself that self care, to give myself that comfort for the now. And so sometimes we might not like what we're facing and we might not like the truths about right now. And I think that's a great starting point to
Mm,
say, you know what, it's okay. Like time is going to pass anyways. Just take slow steps and allow yourself to make a little bit of progress. But like it's totally okay if you don't like it. At least you're noting it. At least you're aware of that now. So I don't know. I have a really like gentle approach when it comes to it to just say like it's okay if you are living in a like almost hoarder type home, just taking note is a step in the right direction. Like you've taken notice. And I think that's a great place to
mhm.
start.
Yeah, that awareness is true with anything,
Oh,
just being
yeah.
able to better notice and what comes from it more deeply, I think is what's gonna help you maintain things more long term, even though it's not fun. But that's why you start with just the noticing, so that way you're not having to go full throttle. Well, okay, I love this, putting things out and just kind of measuring them thing by thing. And I think starting with a smaller win, like a small win space like the bathroom
Hmm.
is a really good tip, especially because it can give you some of that skill set and also that confidence. Like I actually can do this.
Mhm.
and I'm beginning to know myself better. So when you first began to do this, did you have like a whole home to go through, or have you ever been in that position?
So at the time that when my husband and I were first married, we had about 800 square feet we were working with. So I didn't even have a front closet in the front of our house. So we weren't working with a
Mhm.
ton of space, but it was not long after that him and I got married that I did have one of my acquaintances from work. She was a little harsh. And as I was going through my closet, because I think sometimes if your husband's going through your closet with you, they may not want to offend you of, oh, that looks great on you, honey.
Sure.
But I invited someone over
Yeah.
that I actually didn't know very well to go through my closet with me, and so she helped me go through that maybe pile, and it was really fun. So maybe bring over someone that's a little unbiased as you're going through some of the harder stuff. That was one thing that I did,
That's
but,
good.
yeah, after I went through the bathroom, I don't know, it just I don't like to clean. This is probably, like, another huge motivator for me when it comes to, like, living with fewer things. I cleaned houses in college, and I remember cleaning off all the knickknacks off of people's sinks or off all their shelves, and I just I was like, "One day I'm never gonna do that, I don't wanna do that." And there's some
Yeah.
cute, it looks good, but I don't wanna have to take care of that. So, I think there were many motivating factors in probably shifting what I wanted for life. We were talking about the tangibles when it comes to the stuff, but also, like I
Mhm.
said, focusing more on experiences. And I would say that's something my husband and I have always really prioritized, even as we were starting to add children. Just saying to family members, okay, this is the way that you guys have seen that we're starting to live. And for our first daughter, now that she is 3, maybe take her out to lunch. And maybe if she wants to pick out a toy too, that's okay. But go spend time with her. That's more important than showering her with gifts. Take her to a movie. Take her to putt putt. Like take her to all of the things in Columbus. I'm sure that if you live in a big city, there's many options of museums or like conservatories, things to do. So just kind of shifting in that way too of saying, my husband and I aren't going to have all the newest things. I mean, our TV that we still own today, he bought 15 years ago. It's a small TV in our upstairs room that we barely even watch just because we're like, well, we'd rather go out to drinks with friends or we'd rather go out on a date with one another. We'd rather put the money towards that than, again, everyone's values are different, but that has been something really important to us. Again, long term of what we saw for our future.
Mhm. And this is where I think it's nice to hear about what this has given you. And you've talked about more
Yeah.
experiences. You also talked about less cleaning.
Mhm.
Anything else that you can share why this has been so transformative for you and your family?
Okay, so let's get slightly deep with this one. So
Yeah.
I do I often think about my mortality and death and the fact that I'm not going to be able to take everything with me. And I like this sometimes will overwhelm me if I really think about it. One day, someone's going to go through the majority of my things and throw them away. And these special things to me now are going to be trash. And so just saying, like, how much am I going to spend? How much effort am I going to take to buy these things when I could do something else with those funds? I don't know. Again, that's not everyone wants to think that way, but my faith is very important to me as well. And God tells us to store our treasures in heaven. So even if you're not a Christian, but you value relationships, to me, I'm just like, focus that energy elsewhere because it's so fleeting. Impulsive purchases, which a lot of us are doing because it fills this void that we may need, especially at the end of the day. I know a lot of moms will be scrolling on Amazon or through influencers, and you're just hitting click buy. And maybe what you needed to do was go to bed. Maybe what you needed was connection with your spouse or a
Mm,
friend. Maybe you needed to be fed better throughout the day. But oftentimes I've noticed with myself when I'm doing that impulsive thing, it's mostly a void that I'm trying to fill that actually the thing won't fill because I know what I value. So again, I'm
mhm.
tangenting.
No, no, this is good because you just gave us another practical tip because that's something that I try to do is just sit on something for a bit to just really have it in my cart for a while and to remind myself that sales will always come back. I'm a big bargain buyer, and Instagram knows that about me. Like, all my ads are completely sale based. Like, "This is now 70% off," and I just have to always remind myself, that sale's gonna come back. And if I really still want that thing, it'll still probably be there, even for a good deal. So much about personal alignment. and making
Mm.
sure our space is reflective of who we are. What if who we are is in direct conflict with the people that we live with and how they like their things to be in alignment with themselves? And maybe how that means they spend money differently. Maybe they hold on to things a little bit more than maybe you would like. What have you seen both in yourself and in your community of how people have worked through that?
Absolutely. I think another important takeaway with living a minimalist lifestyle is that the world can feel out of control. And I think we have little control over our children. We can try and control as much as we can, but they're still autonomous humans. And so, with minimalism and with really organizing and decluttering our spaces, that kind of gives me back a sense of control. And so, for me, even in the
Yeah.
spaces that I uh, regularly inhabit, so my closet or most of the communal spaces, my husband will give me some freedom over. I have control in those spaces. I allow my kids an amount of control in their rooms, especially like dictated by age. So visual boundaries of saying you can fill this much space, and once it's filled, then we need to start reassessing. Helping the middle
That's
child,
fine.
the baby, maybe pulling things out that he doesn't necessarily know or going. But I think you're mostly talking about what if our partner is not on board. And
Mhm.
fortunately for me, I mostly have a partner that's very aligned with me. But I think one, just living by example. Two, allowing them to have a space that is their own to do with what they want. In our old
Mm.
basement, my husband had his workshop and he had some artwork down there. He had this big fish head that his great grandfather had caught and mounted on a plaque. And I don't necessarily want that in my home, but that was his space. And I don't get to
Yeah.
control him and what he wants in his space. So just allowing for that autonomy in that space is really important because I think then you're not butting heads. Again, for those
Yeah.
communal spaces, just saying, okay, everyone has to exist here. So what are the systems that we want to put into place that work best for everyone, not just you and me, but for our kids too, to where we can all just like move through our day a little bit freer. I think like entryways are a really huge thing and pantries and bathrooms.
Mm.
We have to assess those places. Living room, I've always kind of had control over because again, I'm usually the one here for most of the day. But I think it's probably going to be maybe many conversations and moving that way, but always starting with your stuff first. And that whole living by example, I think is
Mm.
important because for me, I can't really be forced into anything. I'm super stubborn
Yeah.
and I have to just experience it to want to have it, I guess. So
Mm.
I would never want to impose my will in that way on other people because it also can backfire. And I think that's my fear with my kids.
Yeah.
I don't want them to hate this type of lifestyle. I don't want them to just hold on to their possessions and for them to be everything to them. So I think there is a fine line with it all, just continuing to expose even like saying, "Hey, there's a good book, like, or a documentary, like, watch the Minimalist documentary, read some of their books." I think there's ways to go about doing it.
Well, thank you for sharing those, especially I love the thought of you not having a perfectly minimalist house, even though this is so much of what you have done personally and even professionally, that it doesn't have to be so cut dry here. Like
Mhm.
there is wiggle room and there's wiggle room within the relationships that you have and who else you live with. We've had so many great tips. Thank you very much. I want to end with one small way you think listeners can take action on what they learned today.
Absolutely. Okay, let's see, because I feel like I already talked about, um, pulling everything out in one small space and gaining momentum. Usually, if you wanna cut that out, usually my biggest
Yeah.
tip would be to gain momentum with small wins, not necessarily doing an entire overhaul, not starting with sentimental items. But I think my
Mm.
challenge to people would be even just writing down some of the pain points in your life, writing down some of those areas that may be of overwhelm. I did this the other day. I still have to do this of, hey, these areas are starting to get out of control. And what can I address tonight? Like, even if it's 15 minutes, just starting a 15-minute timer, putting on a podcast, putting on your favorite music, tuning everything else out. And you had 15 minutes. Like I said earlier in the podcast, even if this is all very overwhelming to you, just taking note that there's a change that might need to be made there, you're a step ahead of a lot of people. A lot of people don't want to address that they need to do some work here. So I don't know. I just want to encourage people that minimalism is a tool and you can live with less than you think.
Mm. That's definitely what I'm gonna take away from this the most, minimalism being a tool for intention. That
Mhm.
was, like, mind-blowing for me and made so much sense. Okay, Diane, I wanna make sure we direct them to both your Instagram, your podcast, and your book as well. So can you tell them where they should go and where to find your book as well?
Absolutely. So the Instagram account is at Minimalist Moms Podcast. The book is Minimalist Moms: Living and Parenting with Simplicity. And I really do think if you are starting on this journey, this would be a great starting point. It's definitely for beginners and definitely something that you can just take bite-sized little chunks and work
Mm,
your way through. And then the podcast, of course, is Minimalist Moms Podcast, everywhere you listen to podcasts. My hope is to start another podcast here more about this intention that you and I keep talking about. I still have that like in my back
yeah.
pocket, haven't fully
Mhm.
gotten there yet, but one day, one day. So that's where you can find me for now.
Thank you. Well, let us know when you do launch that other one, and we'll
Yeah.
be the first in line to listen, and I'll let my community know. Well, this has been so fabulous. Thank you very much for taking the time for us with About Progress Community, and we really appreciate you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I hope it was helpful.
It was super helpful. I mean, I loved all those tips. That was so great. Um,
I don't feel like I'm answering your your original question. I feel like I'm just going on these
no, no,
little
no. That
tangents of
that
things.
wasn't even. That was just a. That was my own tangent. So
Okay.
if you have something to add to that, great. But if not, I have another question. So it's up to you
Oh
if
yeah,
you have
you can go for the
something to
next
add to it.
question. Yeah, you can go for the next question.
Okay. I'm thinking about. Okay, let me start that again.